The Liberal Democrats have set out a timetable for a second EU referendum as confusion grows over Labour's official position on the issue. What are the Lib Dems proposing? The party, which has put a second vote on the final deal front and centre of their Brexit policy, are proposing a 12-week campaign starting in September 2018, once the final terms of the agreement with the EU have been agreed, to give British voters the option to accept a deal or stay in the bloc. The party's leader Vince Cable said a December vote should be timed to coincide with EU states' own vote on the final agreement and would be compatible with the tight timetable of EU withdrawal. This potential timeline to a public vote shows Brexit is not a done deal, he said. It can be stopped, but not without the approval of the British public. It's time Conservatives and the Labour leadership listened. He has pointed to growing public support for a second referendum, with a recent survey poll showing 50% of the public support the idea. A second poll by BMG suggested there has been a slow but consistent shift in public opinion towards remaining in the EU, with 51% in favour of staying in compared to 41% wanting to leave. Despite this, a Lib Dem amendment to the EU withdrawal bill enshrining in law a second referendum on the final deal looks set to be soundly defeated today. What is Labour's position? Good question. The party's ambiguous approach to Brexit as a whole has enabled it to walk an electoral tightrope, keeping both its urban Remain voters on side while also appealing to its Northern Leave constituencies. However, the lack of clarity is beginning to upset Labour supporters and has not been helped by members of the shadow cabinet repeatedly contradicting each other over the issue of a second referendum. Speaking to the BBC's Andrew Marr on Sunday, Labour's Shadow Home Secretary Diane Abbott said the party doesn't support a second referendum, despite the revelation she wrote to two constituents last month declaring she will argue for the right of the electorate to vote on any deal that is finally agreed. Two other Labour frontbenchers, Shadow International Trade Secretary Barry Gardner and Shadow Justice Secretary Richard Bergen, also used a TV appearance on Sunday to insist Labour is not campaigning for a second vote on Brexit. But the party's deputy leader Tom Watson sowed fresh doubts about Labour unity on Brexit by refusing to dismiss suggestions voters could be asked to vote again on Britain's EU membership. When you're in complex negotiations on behalf of the nation, you shouldn't rule anything out, he told BBC 5 Live. This stance was backed up by the architect of New Labour, Lord Mandelson, who wrote in The Independent that it is right the British people are given the option to renew their consent for Brexit, either in a new referendum or a general election. Both former Labour leader Tony Blair, who has fully committed himself to reversing Brexit, and London's Labour Mayor Sadiq Khan have also called for a fresh Brexit referendum should Parliament reject a UK-EU brokered agreement. You can't have a situation where our Parliament is supposed to be sovereign. Our Parliament rejects the deal made by our government and everyone is in paralysis, Khan said. The division prompted Conservative Immigration Minister Brandon Lewis to brand Labour's approach to Brexit a shambles, adding, they won't rule out a second referendum and can't say what their policy is on immigration or continuing to pay into the EU. Where do the Tories stand? The government has repeatedly rejected calls for a second EU referendum on the final deal. On Monday, Theresa May told the Commons that promising a referendum would actually be betraying the British people. Earlier this month, the party rejected a petition calling for a second vote, with the Brexit minister Robin Walker reiterating the Tory line that there would definitely be no new referendum. Brexiteers have also argued that a second referendum would be an incentive for European leaders to give the UK a poor exit deal, says The Guardian. What about the other parties? In response to the petition, the SNP's Peter Grant said the party would not rule out another Brexit referendum at this stage, but added that people had to live by the results of their decisions ahead of today's amendment vote. Cable urged SNP MPs to show some backbone and back a second referendum. Scottish people voted to remain in the EU, so their elected representatives in Parliament really must push for a popular vote, he said. An SNP spokesman said, we could end up crashing out with no deal, or with a very bad deal, and, in those circumstances, for the UK government simply to say to people they have to accept the outcome no matter how bad it is, may become very difficult for them to sustain. In Wales, increasing numbers of people are favouring a second EU referendum, following what Professor Roger Owen Scully of the Wales governance centre at Cardiff University said had been a shift in attitude in support of a second vote on Britain's decision to leave the EU. The Green Party's co-leader Caroline Lucas has also called for a second referendum on any final deal. So is it likely to happen? With the Tories enjoying a slim majority in the House with the help of their DUP partners and Labour divided on the issue, the chance of a second referendum being voted through Parliament remains slim. Yet die-hard Remainers are pinning their hopes on a significant shift in public opinion between now and next autumn that will make calls for a second referendum impossible to ignore. According to Politico, some MPs believe a delay or collapse in talks could create a rolling Greek-style crisis that would grind down the public's tolerance for Brexit and fuel calls for a second referendum should talks have progressed but fail to reach a deal. Pressure will grow for an extension rather than an economically damaging no deal, adds the site. The Sun reported in August that the EU is actively working toward this goal. Suspicion grows daily that the EU's chief Brexit negotiator Michel Barnier hopes to lengthen the impasse in the hope that the government will fall and a second referendum will follow, said the paper.